There's no doubt about it, and let's get right to that news. So McKinney, who was the team's second-round pick this year out of Alabama, he has suffered a fracture to his left foot. The team announcing this right before we were set to go on the air, and the Giants have released a statement on their website. He's scheduled to undergo surgery later this afternoon at Hospital for Special Surgery. Then, on top of that, linebacker David Mayo has a torn meniscus in his left knee. He's scheduled to undergo surgery tomorrow. So both players suffering injuries that is going to require them to go under the knife. McKinney was certainly in line, as you just alluded to, Paul, for a big year at the safety position. Mayo came on late last season when Alec Ogletree went down, and he was expected to be in play as one of the interior linebackers with, of course, Blake Martinez joining forces in free agency. And we already talked about, Paul, how young this defense is. Well, now the youth movement is really going to be called upon to fill in for these two players.
Well, to be honest with you, I think you're probably looking at veterans who might wind up having to step into those shoes. Now, for example, you look at Sean Chandler, who's one of the Giants' backup safeties. He may be in line now to compete for reps. Montre Hardage, a veteran from the Dolphins who was with Patrick Graham last season. I suspect he is going to be in line now to compete for some safety reps. Christian Angulo probably has an opportunity to maybe work a little bit at safety because he's got length and size. Drayvon Askew-Henry was a safety in college before he went to the XFL and became a cornerback. Jaron Williams, a guy who's really impressed this coaching staff during the early portion of training camp, he's been playing a lot of corner, but they've said they think that he's got somewhat of a similar type of body to Julian Love and could also potentially play some safety. All of these guys, even Chris Williamson, their seventh-round pick from the draft, has the potential because he's played some safety and some corner during his collegiate career. All of these guys are now in the mix. Again, Chandler and Hardage being the two guys who at least have some NFL experience.
Nate Ebner is another player, by the way, that's on the roster. I know he's mainly a special teamer, but he can play the safety position, so that certainly is an option as well. I think my first takeaway here is Julian Love, who's looked at as a versatile player who certainly could be moved around. I would think right now, because a number of the guys that you mentioned also are known for their cornerback play, that Love, because of the McKinney injury, may be asked to play strictly more safety than perhaps him being moved around as we had anticipated this season.
Well, I think the bigger impact is, do the Giants now reduce the potential of that three safety package that I think so many of us have talked about over the course of the last couple of months? Because if you're going to rely on Peppers and Love as your two starting safeties and you don't necessarily have a ton of confidence in those other guys being the third safety, well, now guess what? Now you're going to have to try to adjust, and that means either you're going to play another corner instead of playing that third safety, or maybe, and again, this could open up things for a guy, let's say, like T.J. Brunson, or maybe Tate Crowder. These are guys who are kind of smallish for linebackers, have some athleticism and cover skills. Maybe they wind up jumping into what would have been that third safety role. You mentioned Mayo going out of the lineup. Well, he was in competition in that spot with Ryan Connolly, who was missed, I guess it was 3 days in a row of practice, because they got maintenance on his sore knee, which he had surgery on last year. That one, I think if Connolly is okay, they can deal with that, because you also have Devontae Downs, who has suddenly made a big impact during the early portion of training camp as an inside linebacker and inserted himself into that competition with Mayo and Connolly. So maybe that spot isn't as dangerous as this third safety spot, which really is now a wild card as far as I'm concerned.
Well, the two young linebackers that you threw out that could be experimental options at safety, specifically T.J. Brunson and Tate Crowder, they're going to now move up the depth chart on the interior linebacker position because, as you mentioned, Connolly has been moving along slowly given the fact that he's coming back from that significant torn ACL. And, there's a lot of young guys behind Mayo and Martinez when it comes to the linebacker position. And some of the other guys that we've talked about are mainly outside guys like a Devontae Downs, Cam Brown. We'll see where they move him around. Josiah Tauefa is another player, but we're talking about not a lot of experience. So Mayo was by far one of their most experienced interior linebackers going back to his days with the Carolina Panthers. And I think the goal was between Mayo, Martinez, and Connolly, you have a nice rotation. Now, all of a sudden, a guy like Crowder and Brunson, who they were planning on moving along slowly and getting a better grasp of the team and the scheme, now they all of a sudden may see some reps beyond special teams in the early goings of this season.
Well, I disagree with you, Lance. Connolly is an inside linebacker. He's not an outside guy, so you do have some depth there as long as his knee holds up. And Devontae Downs, who had been an outside linebacker from his days with the Vikings, has been inside during the course of training camp. And it's clear that they prefer him in there. So he's not an outside guy anymore. He's now a converted inside guy. And then the other guy who has certainly seen some work on the inside over the course of the summer is Lorenzo Carter. They've kind of fussed with him a little bit and tried to see if they can maybe get him to play some multiple roles as well. I don't see Carter being a standard, regular base defense inside linebacker. That's not going to happen. He is their starting strong side backer without question, but I do think there will be packages where you will see him move to the inside.
Well, and a lot of this is also dependent on how often Patrick Graham has four linebackers on the field, too.
No doubt.
Because, in this day and age, you don't necessarily see the four linebackers on the field for every single down. They could get away with, circumventing the injuries if they're not going to rely on four linebackers consistently. So that's another thing to at least keep in mind. And hopefully some of these guys that can be that linebacker / hybrid safety can give them some freedom and flexibility within the scheme. But clearly, as you're getting set for the start of the season, we're closing in on about 2 weeks away. Last thing you want to hear about is your high second-round pick being at least out for the time being. We don't know a timeline until obviously he has surgery, but just to give you an idea, and we were talking about this before we came on the air, Derwin James, who also is a safety, very high pick in the first round, 17th overall, I believe, by the Chargers a few years ago, who has made quite the impact. He suffered a foot injury. It was a stretch fracture in his right foot August 15th last season. He actually had to have surgery as a result of that, and it took him about 3 months to recover because he went on IR and was not activated until November 30th, 2019. So we're just throwing that out there. And we don't know the significance of the foot injury for McKinney. The Giants haven't specified that. But I think if you take into consideration what Derwin James went through, I think you at least need to anticipate and plan that it's possible he may not be returning, if any, until November at this point.
Well, I'm going to turn back the history books. You remember Jeremy Shockey had a similar situation back in 2004, and he had surgery in June of that year, and he did come back and started practicing in training camp in August. So from middle of June, July, into August, it was 2 months for him. That is going to be the most optimistic estimate that you're going to get from anybody as far as I'm concerned, because I remember when Shockey went through it, we were all like, wow, 2 months, he's already back there on the field. There was a lot of doubt whether he would be ready for the beginning of training camp. And there it was in the middle of August, and Shockey was on the field practicing. He was sore, but he was doing it. So I would say just without any medical evidence whatsoever or any more of an explanation from the Giants, I would think that realistically you're a minimum of 2 months, probably more like 3 based on the evidence with Derwin James, as you said.